Aloha, can you hear me? Okay, everyone, and hello from wherever you're joining us from. So, we are going to start the session for today. Thank you so much for your patience. Thank you so much for joining us today. This is going to be our fourth session, and I am bringing up our speaker of today, the man who's blessed us with such a wonderful book series that we are currently basing our sessions on is none other than Ken Kuland. Ken, karibu. So,
I didn't hear you.
can you hear
Yes.
me, Ken?
Aloha.
Yes,
I can hear you fine. Yes. Can you
thank
hear
you.
me okay?
Yes, I can get you well.
Good.
So,
Great.
just to introduce you to our team today, for a start, my name is Adam Shem. I am the Programs Associate at Liberty Sparks, Kenya. And our author today is none other than Ken Schooland, who is an Associate Professor of Economics. He is the Vice President of International Relations for Liberty International, and he sits on the board of scholars of the Grassroots Institute of Hawaii, and is also a member of the Mont Pelerin Society. Ken Schooland authored The Adventures of Jonathan Gallibon, a free market odyssey published in the 90s, editions in 58 languages, and adapted to theatrical and musical productions across Africa, Europe, Latin America, and even Asia. He also authored Shogun's Ghost, The Dark Side of Japanese Education. He is the director of the graduate program in Japanese Business Studies at Chaminade University of Honolulu. He is a professor of economics at Hakodate University in Japan. You'll correct me if my spellings of those or pronunciations of those are wrong. And at Sheldon Jackson College in Sitka, Alaska. He serves as an international economist in the U.S. International Trade Commission, the U.S. Department of Commerce, and the U.S. Office of the Special Representative of Trade Negotiations in the Washington, D.C. The floor is yours, uh, Professor. And today you're going to be talking to us about how or why stories teach economics better. And of course, we are eager to listen to you today. For everyone who is joining in, as usual, you remember we take our attendance. I'm going to be dropping the link to the attendance in the comment section. And the secret code for today is economics. I repeat, the secret code for today is economics. Over to you, Professor.
Well, I'm very glad to be here with you. This is such a great time. I see that people are already posting things in the chat section, and I'm glad to see so many people participating in this. Well, I'm delighted to be participating in this. Many years ago, I was asked to write some radio commentaries about local issues here in Hawaii. And so, as an economist, I went on the radio. I had 90 seconds for my radio spots. And people weren't very much interested in just hearing an economist talk about economics. So I just thought, and I got very little response at the time. So I decided to make it a story along the lines of Gulliver's Travels and The Little Prince, some things that I found humorous and thoughtful, thought provoking. And so I started to make an engaging story. As you may recall, we last left Jonathan Gulliver on a remote Pacific island after his boat was tossed about by a terrific storm. And in 90 seconds, I was able to satirize and make fun of local policies in a story form, much like uh, Jonathan Swift had done with his stories of Gulliver's Travels. Um, and the response picked up all around town. People thought it was funny and humorous, and they saw the connection to local policies. So I decided to do more of it. And after a while, the series had grown so much so that I made a program for radio, and then one man at Small Business Hawaii here in town said, well, let's put this into a book and put it and distribute it into the schools. So we published The Adventures of John Gullible, a story form, which eventually turned into a full book here. And you can see I've got this, ultimately it picked up quite around the world. All that bookcase there is filled with the many editions of the book from 58 published languages. The most recent one was in Asante in Ghana, the Asante Twi language. And we had the Kiswahili edition, the Arabic edition was published in Jordan, actually. And then probably the most interesting example was one of the play that was produced by Adedayo Thomas in Nigeria, and it circulated as a theatrical form in Nigeria and Ghana. Also available in Africa was the French edition, and then we made the commentary edition that was produced in South Africa that added to all the stories. Every chapter would have background references and questions, a lot more further reading and so on, to help educators to apply the lessons in classrooms if they liked. And I first published it in Hawaii, but I'm a member of the Liberty International, so I took it to our annual conferences in different places of the world, and our friends there liked it a lot, and they decided to make the Dutch edition was the first, then the Russian edition with the Fall of the Union, and then it started just picking up in many other places around the world. So I'm very pleased to say that it's now published in 58 languages. And people have used it in a lot of different ways. They've used it as theater, because in the universities in Nigeria and Ghana, it was much more likely to reach a broad audience. And then a musical production in Slovakia and in Kazakhstan, another theatrical production in Kenya, and another in Brazil. And then we made it into an animated film series, which is now available. You can go to my website, jonathangullible.com, and on the media section, you can go to find the Free to Choose network production of Jonathan Gullible. Just the first season, it's about the first third of the book, is available in animation. And from the epilogue, well, with the very first edition was published in Russia, right after the fall of the Soviet Union, they asked me to publish to write out an explanation of things like property and taxes, because they didn't understand. They had no concept of property and taxes prior to the fall of the Soviet Union. So I wrote out an introduction called The Philosophy of Liberty, and that's been turned into an animation, an 8-minute animation that explains basically the principles of a liberty in society, an individual liberty. I think the success of the book has been that humor strikes people broadly, and they like to see, well, they can always mock and make fun of and see the folly of many government policies in trying to control people, when people are usually just eager to be free and to pursue their own ends without the controls by other people. And humor and satire also gets around the censors, both in the schoolroom, censors in your own mind, and censors in state and government authorities. So, for example, we've had the possibility of it being published in Iran. It was probably the first free market book published in China and Vietnam and Russia, many countries that otherwise would have very, very strict government control and censorship over what is allowed to be published. So that's the basic story. And I think you may recall that if you've been able to read the book, one guy says in the code here, what's the secret code? The secret code is economics. Yeah, oh, yeah, you gave that there too. Oh, that's an interesting system you've got here. Isn't this remarkable? We were able to just communicate with each other all over the planet. And now I started off the book with a chapter about innovation. Here's Jonathan has just crash landed on this island, and he's trying to find out about the people. And he sees this woman being dragged off through the woods by a couple burly men, and so he wants to help her, but he's not able to do it by himself. So he goes scrambling looking for someone to help him rescue this woman. So he comes up to this clearing and he sees a lot of men standing around trees, beating the tree trunks with sticks. He goes up to the person who seems to be in charge. He says, "Please help this woman. She's been dragged off by these burly men." And the supervisor says, "Oh no, she's been arrested." Arrested for what? Or for threatening all the jobs of these strong tree workers. Well, how could she do that? Well, as you can see, we knock down trees by beating them with sticks. It can take 100 men a good month to knock down a good-sized tree. But this woman, she knocked down a tree all by herself in less than an hour by coming to work with a sharp metal piece attached to the end of her stick. And it was much more efficient and effective. And Jonathan says, well, that's great, because then you can use your time to do other things. You can use your time that you save in knocking down trees to build tables and chairs and houses and boats. Oh no, but the purpose of work in this society is not to have more products and more productive effort. It's to have safe and secure employment. Well, a lot of people recognize that. I mean, that seems foolish to knock down trees with sticks instead of with hatchets. But on the other hand, there are lots of ways throughout society that people have resisted new ideas, and they laugh at that. But if they apply it to the way it's being used throughout society, then they see that the government has often stood in the way of new ideas because it threatened old ways of doing things. Now we see it today, a lot of complaints about AI is taking jobs and so on. And what people see is the job that's lost. What is unseen is the other jobs that may open up. Now in history, there was a time when there were no steamboats. Boats were run either by sail or by oar. And the first person who put a steam engine onto a boat so that he could go with the wind, against the wind, with the current, against the current on the Elbe River in Germany. He thought people would be excited about this new innovation, but instead the sailors who felt their jobs would be threatened burned his boat to the waterline in order to get rid of this new idea. And so they didn't have another steamboat on that river for another 80 years because people felt threatened by the idea of change. And there's sort of a famous story of Milton Friedman, an economist in the US who had gone to China, and he saw that they had a lot of men with shovels that were building a road. And on the side, he saw this tractor, but they weren't using it. And he asked them, well, why don't you use the tractor? It's more efficient and effective at building the road than all these men with shovels. And they said, oh, but then these guys wouldn't have jobs. So he said, well, if the purpose is just to have jobs, why don't you have them use spoons instead of shovels? Because you can create even more jobs and be less productive. Well, at any rate, the world is filled with stories about innovation and resistance to that. That's just chapter 1. And we go through many different observations about society. And I did it in the pattern of Gulliver's Travels or The Little Prince. I don't know if you've ever read The Little Prince, but it's one that's told with, not by preaching and telling people how they ought to think, but simply asking questions and getting people to think through the folly of the way things are done and maybe rethink how things could be done better. So with that, maybe an introduction, I would like to open it up to you for any questions or any comments or thoughts that you may have. And I see that you have quite a number of good people here. And so let me ask you some questions. Are there some kinds of have some of you read the book? Have you some ideas about how this sort of book may apply to things that you've seen going on in your own country? Oh, I should also mention, since no questions right away, people were saying when I went to Poland and they saw the Polish edition of the book, they said, how is it that you knew about the issues and concerns and the economics of Poland? How long were you living here? And I said, well, I wasn't living in Poland. I was writing about issues that were arising that I saw in Hawaii. But there are very many broad, almost universal concepts that people experience everywhere. I think everywhere people, for example, resist the introduction of new ideas. One example is that people used to object to machines because, especially in the factories where they were producing clothing, they said, well, you're producing clothing with these machines, and the machines are replacing people's jobs who were doing it by hand. So we're going to throw our wooden shoes into the machines to break the machines. In the Netherlands, the wooden shoes were called sabots. And so I think that's how they got the term sabotage, the use of a shoe to try and destroy a machine that was producing clothing more efficiently than people were doing by hand prior to that. We see it a lot of times in the United States. Right after World War II, they developed containers. It used to be that when ships came into port and people had to do it by hand, unload one ship and then add another. I mean, to unload all the boxes and cargo by hand, piece by piece. It took 100 men, maybe a whole month, to move the cargo from the ship to the shoreline and then put it into trucks, all these little pieces. But another guy came along and he developed the cargo container. In other words, it was a big box that could be put on the ship and be lifted by a crane and put on the back of a truck. So with just one person operating a machine and a crane, you could save hundreds of hours, thousands of hours of human labor and much time. It reduced the damage. It reduced the time. It reduced the cost. It reduced the theft. It reduced the damage from weather while all this stuff is out in the countryside. I mean, out on the docks, and it made it much more efficient. But people at first resisted this. They said, well, we're going to lose our jobs. But they didn't think about how many more jobs by the multitude would be created by making this part more efficient than more ideas would be developing later. Okay, so I see some questions popping up on the screen. Let me read these and respond to them. Do you think storytelling would be an effective way to teach economics if adopted more? Oh, absolutely, yes. I use it in my classes, and my students always say that the book, The Adventures of Jonathan Gullible, is much more interesting than the textbook. And so I use this in my class, and it's got nice maps and lots of illustrations and pictures, which just make it more fun and interesting than usual dry textbooks. And it leads to a lot of discussion, a lot of debate. And that's something that textbooks don't usually do. Textbooks put people to sleep often. Not that they're wrong, but they have a very academic approach to things, which is too serious. And young people like to have fun while they're learning. And I do too, actually. It keeps me awake rather than textbooks. Let's see. What inspired you to use storytelling instead of the traditional economic writing to simplify complex economic ideas? I was on radio that I was doing this with my 90-second radio spots. And that, of course, meant that I had to be very concise. I would sit down. I have knowing that I have a 90-second radio spot to give at the end of the week. And I would spend much time rewriting and rewriting and rewriting. I probably had 8 drafts, and this is in the day of pencil and pen, writing out on paper before we had much use of well, there weren't the word processor those days. It was back in the 1980s that I was writing this stuff for the first time. And I went through it a lot to try and make it concise, to repeat important points, to have lots of interesting questions that essentially made fun of the way that things were when they're done wrong. And so it was a very effective way. I got a good response from the listeners all around, but it had to be very, very, I had to work at it to make it concise and enjoyable. And that's different than academic writing. Academics, they can write endlessly and in 1,000 words say what should have been said in just a sentence. Let's see. Jonathan Gullible does not apply his ideas about how the Carumpo operates, but asks questions. That's right. Why do you think the majority of society not see this ideology, and how do they get free from the government? Yeah, I think people are pursuing their own lives, and they don't often see the problems around them because they grow up with them, and they feel that the life around them is pretty much inevitable when that's all they've seen. So it takes someone to question that and challenge that, to make them think differently about things. A lot of times the things that drive people are just fears or just tradition or just ritual, and they're not really thinking about, well, why is it this way? One thing that I think ought to be always asked is challenge authority. Always ask the question, why? And now maybe I've missed the question here. Let's see. When you first wrote Jonathan Gullible, what gap in economic education were you trying to fill? Oh, that's a very good point. I think the biggest problem with the learning that people get as they're growing up is the education system. Now, I know it's well intended. They want young people to learn from the older generation, but the way it's designed is often just to get obedience and to shape minds to fit authority and to follow orders and to be somewhere on time. And they're not really creative in the classroom. I almost think that everybody learns in a different way on their own, and they ought to be allowed to learn in many, many ways, not just sitting in a classroom in a very authoritarian system, getting lectures from a teacher and just taking notes and regurgitating responses. That's not real learning. I think real learning is out in the real world. There's nothing more natural in life than to learn by imitation. Young people observing what their parents and adults are doing and following along and learning by practice in the real world, rather than just be learning in a classroom, which is totally alien to the real world. It's totally, completely different. And so often the teachers are teaching a kind of system that doesn't fit the real world. And so young people get bored with that and they tune out. Some of them do it very well and they can get the grades, but the best entrepreneurs, the best creative minds are bored to death and have to be outside of the classroom before they can be really productive. Let's see. I want to go to, let's see. What do you think is the most misunderstood economic idea among young people today? How can a story fix that? I'd say the most misunderstood economic idea is well, freedom from authority. You know, people think that authority figures must be right because they're authority figures, and well, they got in that position of authority because they know better than everybody else. But I ask the question a lot of times. I ask my classes, Do you trust the campaign promises of politicians? And they usually say, well, no, we don't. I say, are the is the honesty of politicians, are the person who gets elected to politics, are they usually the most honorable and honest people, or are they dishonorable and dishonest people? And they say, well, usually it's people without much good ethics that get elected. And I say, well, do politicians have higher moral and ethical standards? Are they smarter than you? No. Well, if people don't trust the promises and don't think that they're honest and don't think that they're smart, why do they revere the things that authority figures then tell them how to run their lives? They should, as much as possible, think for themselves, dismiss the authorities, and try to get around the authority ways of thinking. So, ask people: do they really want freedom, or do they want just to have a life that's conformist? And a lot of times, people want the conformist life because it suits their fears. But the way you get true change in society and true development is people who think differently, who think outside the box, who get around the censors, around the rules, around the regulations, and are creative. Let's see here. What do you think is the most misunderstood economic idea among young people? Oh, I mentioned that. For our participants here today, how can they personally become better storytellers of liberty? Yeah, that's a good thing. I think that probably instead of teachers asking students just to write reports and research papers, they ought to be involved with theater, creative theater. In fact, I would invite you to maybe have a competition of writing up a new chapter for Jonathan Gullible. I mean, the book is filled with what I did with all these radio spots. Basically, I said, well, okay, now how am I going to put this in a story? I had to change the order of things and rewrite the connections so that it could go together into a single book. But every single chapter in there was a radio commentary, a 90-second radio spot. And you could write some more. I'd welcome to have a new edition of Jonathan Gullible. I mean, it's grown a lot over the years. It started off in very simple version. You know, this was the original copy of Jonathan Gullible. I had a girl at the school who was an artist do the first illustration, and I changed that though later because publishers and bookstores didn't want to carry a book that looked like it was just a children's story. So I had to make the book a little more sophisticated, and then it was, you know, it's funny how people, it was the same words, the same story, but if you put a different cover on it, people think, oh, that's just for children, or that's for adults, or so marketing can go a long ways in determining who you can appeal to and how you can appeal to them. And the story does, ironically, it appeals to elementary school kids in Kazakhstan, but it was used in the Hong Kong Economic Journal in the as the premier economics business magazine in Hong Kong, serialized for several dozen episodes, issues. Many business magazines have run this book. Well, let me get back to your questions here. What's the future? Oh, and so let me invite you to submit new chapters, and I can post them on my website, jonathangullible.com, and I can also include them in a new edition of the book that might be coming out someday. There's been like 8 or 9 editions of Jonathan Gullible in English, and it just keeps getting bigger and bigger. You don't want to get it too big, though, because then people don't want to translate it into another language. For our participants here, Okay, what's the future of economic education through storytelling? Well, I think that's it's a must because is too controlled by government schools and the mentality that the government is the entity that thinks best and understands your life and how to control your life. I think for people to get out from under the control of government policies and and the roles of tradition in society is to try and experiment with storytelling far beyond that. You find the world of the internet allows a lot more diversity of opinion than used to exist in the classroom when there was only one way to view things, and that was the traditional way. Uh, how do you suggest educators use Jonathan Gullible to inspire critical thinking in students? Ah, yes, I think it's best for educators maybe to present this, but not to use it to preach. And that was the good thing, the good lesson from Gulliver's Travels and The Little Prince. It was through questions and observation that you get the best kind of creative thinking. And so I think the theater is a very good way. The debate is a very good way. I even developed games. For example, there's a Jeopardy game where you have uh, competing responses to games are very, very effective at engaging everybody actively, and they get competitive over responses and answers and so on, and they're coming up with new ideas. And so that can be done in the classroom or in society. Uh, I mean, through special sessions like you're holding with your uh, this organization with Liberty Sparks. Liberty Sparks is a great organization. I visited in Tanzania once and met your group and what Liberty Sparks was doing there. I was so impressed. Um, let's see. How should a truly free society correct inherited injustices, power asymmetries, captured commons, crony monopolies without sacrificing liberty's core, voluntary exchange, and equal rules? Yeah, that's a very fundamental question. Um, because for me, the process of freedom is through spontaneous order. You're generating solutions that central planners cannot see. That's the great thing about free markets composed as opposed to central planning and government overseers with central planning trying to impose ideas from the top down is doomed to fail, I think, and has been shown to fail, very ineffective throughout history and around the world. But the creativity of the marketplace is constantly um, opening up to so much innovation and ideas that come from so many different people's different minds because they're free to choose and free to think and free to implement and free to fail and learn from that and learn from the positive experiences and the negative experiences. um, think about an airplane. When the Wright brothers came up with their first airplane back in 1904, I think it was, um, they couldn't know what a 747 jet was going to look like. They were carrying passengers all around the world. It took 100 years of people experimenting, thousands and thousands of people all doing different things and coming up with different ideas to create uh, the kind of advances that we have today and that we see. So you can't necessarily see how the market is going to solve a problem. It's trusting that the market can, because people are so creative and so innovative and pursuing their own in pursuing their own ends. They're serving society. That's uh, what Adam Smith would have referred to as the invisible hand. It's not a single hand. It's the actions and benefits of a spontaneous order of millions of people pursuing their own ends, each building a better and more productive society, as opposed to the invisible gun that is the implied threat behind government orders: do it this way, or you'll be punished. So let's see. Each episode tells a moral or lesson. Which story do you think best captures the tension between freedom and control? I'm really glad you asked that, because my favorite chapter for that point is the one called The Grand Inquirer. And that's a reference to the, it's chapter 36 in the illustrated edition of the book. And I often refer to this because it's taken really from Fyodor Dostoevsky's book, The Brothers Karamazov. The Brothers Karamazov was a very fascinating book from a Russian author, Dostoevsky. And in that story, it tells about how, well, basically the message was from a religious ruler saying, people don't want freedom. They just want to be led. And that was a kind of a shocker to me, to think that people don't want freedom, because you think of people all the time striving for personal freedom and so on. But the difference is people often want their own freedom, but they don't want the freedom for other people. And that's a very, very big difference. Freedom is something that you can't just have for yourself if you don't allow it for other people too. And so a lot of times people are afraid. Actually, they're sometimes afraid to have their own personal freedom, because along with that comes responsibility. And people just would rather be told what to do than to feel they're responsible for making a mistake or making an error. So it takes the courageous people, not the fearful people, to make advances in society and in life. And in that, you have to accept the fact that a lot of people don't want freedom, and they will resist you because they're too afraid of freedom. So it's a task to try and to help people be less afraid. And the way we do that is to show how things are done differently around the world. And that every place around the world, people are innovating and coming up with new ideas that are creative and positive. And I think seeing that it works out well is very helpful. A very closed society where you're not allowed to look over the border and see how people are doing other things in better ways in other places. A very closed society then becomes very static and fixed. That's why so much of the world didn't grow and didn't have any change, and there was no prosperity for thousands of years, because people were very, very isolated. But with our age of communication and our age of travel, we're able to see so much that is done in other places that we can borrow from and imitate and develop and improve on. So at any rate, that's yes, I do have a moral lesson in every chapter. You notice that the questions at the end of the chapter are always end with, and what are the ethics involved? And the point of ethics in every chapter is, was there the use of force or fraud involved in that case in society? And I, as a libertarian, champion the non-aggression principle. I'd say that the best society is the free society, where voluntary action is allowed to rule, not to be ruled. And so the non-aggression principle says, if I don't have a right to initiate force or violence against another person, I don't have the right to ask another person to do that for me. If I take your money against your will, that's stealing. If I ask the government to take it for you, from you for me, it's still stealing. And it doesn't matter whether I do it myself or I ask somebody else to do it for me, even if that person has a fine hat, even if large numbers of people vote for it. For me to take money or liberty from another person against their will is wrong. So I feel that the voluntary society is the one that holds out the greatest promise for greatest prosperity for people. And I think that the evidence is very, very clear that in the greater free markets there are in societies, the greater prosperity people get, because freedom is very practical. You have much more practical, prosperous results from allowing people to pursue their own ends rather than to have them directed by as if they were slaves. Let's see. Okay, what is the role of AI in economics future? Do you think the young generation will be more creative with AI? Well, yes, definitely. It's a new tool. It has enormous advantages for improving productivity. I got worried in my classrooms though when I was teaching classes online. I got very discouraged when students would take the question that I would send them and they would just plug it into the computer, ChatGPT, to get an answer, and they'd have whole papers and things written for them. So, I mean, it can be very, very helpful and productive, increasing your productivity, but it can also be a substitute for any creative thinking. So, well, teaching just has to become more effective at how you apply and use the AI. Tremendously helpful, just like the internet has been tremendously helpful, just like so many tools, good and bad results for them, but the benefits far outweigh the negatives. Of course, there's always these movies about how AI is going to take over the world and ultimately control human beings. I don't know about that. And I'd say that yeah, that's something beyond the scope of this particular discussion here. But yeah, I generally like all the things, the benefits that AI have, just like the woman bringing the sharp metal on a stick to make cutting down trees more effective. Innovation is usually helpful in making us more productive. What are your top 3 economic truths that you hope every reader remembers long after today's session in reading The Adventures of Jonathan Gullible? Good question. Well, rather than the top 3 economic truths, let me mention the one economic truth is that I hope the lesson comes away from the book is that the non-aggression principle, that the use of force, the threat of force, is not the best way to get good, positive results in human action. Human action is best when it's driven by its own impulse to strive. My grandfather used to say that the ABCs of life were achievement, beauty, and companionship. I like that. That's what I like to strive for in my own life. And that can't be imposed on me by rulers or government edicts or restrictions. I have to pursue these things in my own life, and that's through a voluntary society. So that's why every question behind every chapter there ultimately says, what's the ethics involved? And the ethics is, well, there's more to ethics than just the non-aggression principle, that you don't use force, but that's a very fundamental one for this book. And of course, then I think there are a lot of other things too that drive people: the compassion for their neighbors and for their and for other people in hard times. But voluntary action is a nice way, the best way to help out your neighbors, either by creativity or by generosity. But it's meaningful when it's done, and it's virtuous when it's done by voluntary action, not by compulsory action. Let's see. It is assumed that the most of the countries in Africa have not grown economically, yet they have the necessary resources to grow. What might be the reason why most of them haven't grown economically? Well, that's a very good question, and I'm very impressed by the work of Magatte Wade, who talks about how Africa isn't short of resources at all, has the greatest people, it has the greatest natural resources, all the things there, but too much of a belief that rulers have to tell us what to do, and too much fear. So if people are able to diminish the fears, diminish the rulers, allow people to be entrepreneurs. And what is an entrepreneur? Wow, an entrepreneur is a person who's willing to take personal risks at their own risk. And like, for example, consider if you wanted to make a clothing factory. Well, you want to hire somebody to work for you. And the entrepreneur creates this whole vision of how he's going to put together the labor and the materials and the equipment and the financing and the marketing and the production. Has to do all that at great risk first. The person working for them doesn't want to wait until it's sold to be paid. They want to be paid now. The guy who's providing the material for it wants to be paid now for the material he's supplying. He doesn't want to wait until the product's been sold. So the entrepreneur has to take together all of these ideas, put it on his own back, and at great personal risk, and before he can sell it. But once they sell it, if the customer likes it, then it's a signal of success. And if the customer doesn't like it, it's a signal that you got to do things differently. And all of those things are I think there's the capacity for Africa to do that, and they're doing it. Lots and lots of people are doing it, but they're crushed often by rules and regulations, and the lack of property rights, and lack of secure contracts, and lack of opportunity to trade, too high of taxes, too many regulations, too many fees, too many authorities with control and asking for bribes and payouts. So I think a change of thinking about the value of these things is very important. One time I was in China, I asked my students there, what do you think of somebody who uses his position of power to accept a bribe, to demand a bribe before he allows you to do something? And because he's going to get rich personally by demanding this bribe, using his position of power to do this. And I remember the students in China, they said, well, he's lucky. He's got this job that can make him rich. It's a government job. And I was thinking, gee, in other places in the world, they'd say he's a scoundrel. He's a crook. He's hurting people by standing in the way of productive people. So a lot of it is your mindset. Do you view people with this kind of power with awe and respect, or do you view them as scoundrels? There was a survey done in the United States asking people what they thought of the honesty and ethical standards of politicians relative to many other occupations. And actually, people ranked the politicians pretty low, just slightly above prostitutes and car salesmen. They were among the lowest of the occupations. And why? Well, because they view them as pretty much dishonorable people. So I think a healthy distrust of politicians is a good way for a society to minimize the controls that they give to politicians. If they don't have any control, no power, then they don't get in the way of people's prosperity. Let's see. Okay. There is a problem with the sound. I hope that I'm still audible here. Well, I'm coming up to the top of the hour here, and I'm seeing the questions have sort of finished. So maybe is there a last question or thought that you have about this for me? And I welcome any one of you who would like to write a review of the book, to send me your picture and your review of the book, and I'll post it on the Jonathan Gullible website. The website is jonathangullible.com, and I will, and they go to the news section there, the news section on the menu, and that will tell you all the ways that Jonathan Gullible is being used around the world. And then if you want the animation, you can see that, and an audio narration that I've done there at the media menu point on the Jonathan Gullible website. And what else? All the Philosophy of Liberty animation. So I welcome that. Are there any other comments or thoughts? Ed, come and visit me. One day I'll come and visit you. If I get an invitation and see that you're doing some good stuff, I'll try and come down there and take a look and join you. I really appreciate the fact that you're using The Adventures of Jonathan Gullible. Put it into a theater. Is there a problem with sound? Have we lost sound? Okay, I'll turn this back over to the host. Is there anything else? Oh, I see. You've got a link here for feedback. Good. I'll look that up myself. Liberty Sparks, I turn it over to you. Okay. Well, thank you very much for your inviting me, and I would welcome this at any time again. I'm retired now, so I have more time on my hands. Okay, I can't. Are you? Yeah. Your sound is not. You're muted, I think. Okay. Well, I'll sign off then. Aloha. Please send me. And you can write to me at JonathanGullible.com. Well, my email is ken.schooland@gmail.com if you have any further interaction you'd like to have with me. Okay, and you can from the program host you can get my email address. Okay. Aloha.